Sometimes a relationship doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it erodes slowly, so slowly that by the time you recognize the damage, part of you has already been carried away by the tide. This is how I learned that love alone cannot stand against an entire history someone refuses to let go of. When I proposed to my fiancée 7 months ago, I believed our future would be something we built on equal ground. Steady, hopeful, and safe. We'd been together 4 years. We'd grown through storms, supported each other through late nights, job struggles, and emotional battles. I thought I knew all her shadows and she knew mine, but I didn't understand what it meant to live with the ghost she still kept at the door. Her childhood wasn't a place people should revisit lightly. She grew up in an environment where affection was conditional and criticism was constant. Her parents controlled everything they could, from her choices to her confidence. Her two brothers were always favored, while she carried the weight of every mistake, every blame, every angry moment. When she turned 18, she wasn't guided into adulthood. She was pushed out of it. She left with nothing but determination and a quiet belief that she had to be perfect to earn even the smallest bit of approval. And somehow, despite everything, she managed to build herself from the ground up. Scholarships, late-night shifts, strict budgets. She clawed her way through all of it. Today, she's successful, independent, respected. On paper, she escaped, but emotionally, she never did. Her family kept drifting back into her life, inch by inch, year by year. A quick visit here, a small favor there, and soon they were part of our weekly routine. Uninvited, unpredictable, and overwhelmingly disruptive. They were never gentle with her, never considerate. They walked into our home as if it belonged to them, criticizing, demanding, acting familiar in ways that made the air tense. Every time they came, the atmosphere changed. A silent heaviness settled over her shoulders. Her voice became small. Her hands shook. And my heart, it broke a little more each time I watched. I understood trauma. I understood how deeply people can internalize old patterns. But I also understood something she couldn't admit. Contact with them hurt her. Every interaction drained her. She cried afterward, quietly trying to hide it from me. But I heard it. I saw it. And I felt powerless. I tried to help. I tried to gently encourage boundaries, healthier distance, structured communication. I offered support, went with her to therapy, listened to every memory that surfaced like a bruise returning to skin. But as time passed, her family grew bolder. They visited more often. They made themselves comfortable in places that weren't theirs. They treated our shared space like a stage for their opinions and criticisms. And each time my fiancé would freeze, caught somewhere between fear, habit, and longing. Longing for something they had never once given her. She told me during one of our hardest conversations that she still hoped they would finally see her worth, that maybe she just had to be better, work harder, be more helpful, more patient, more forgiving. That broke something inside me, because I knew where that road led, and I knew I couldn't follow her down it. I was living in the house she had purchased years before we met, but I contributed to everything: mortgage, groceries, utilities. I treated it like our home, because that's what partners do. But no matter how much I invested, she struggled to let me have a say in who entered. And when her family arrived unannounced, she couldn't bring herself to turn them away. I didn't blame her. I didn't resent her. But I was reaching a point where the situation was harming both of us. I couldn't build a peaceful life while her past kept tearing through the front door. One night after a particularly tense visit from her parents, I found her crying in the bedroom. Not the quiet, controlled tears she normally hid. This was raw, exhausted, desperate crying. And when I sat beside her, she whispered something that chilled me. I don't want them to be angry with me. I just want them to love me. It wasn't the voice of a grown woman with a stable life. It was the voice of a child who never received the safety or affection she deserved. I held her. I reassured her. But as I did, a thought surfaced, one so heavy it stunned me. What happens when we have kids? Will she let this cycle continue? Will our children grow up witnessing the same fears she lived with? Will she let her family walk in and overwhelm her during moments when she needs stability, like postpartum stress, illness, or emergencies? What happens if her family starts demanding financial support from us both? These weren't small worries. These were pillars of our future. And if we didn't address them now, they would shatter everything later. I realized I had to speak up, not in frustration, not in anger, but out of responsibility to myself, to her, to the life we were supposed to build. I planned to talk to her the following day, calm, structured, honest. But she came home early from work, tired and already carrying the weight of a long day. I decided it was the moment. I sat her down. I told her gently but clearly that things couldn't continue like this. I explained that I didn't feel safe or stable planning a wedding while her family had so much access to her life. I told her I was afraid of what our future might look like if boundaries weren't established. I didn't tell her to cut them off. I told her to set limits, reasonable ones, healthy ones, for her own well-being. I suggested couples therapy. I told her I wanted her to feel supported, not controlled, that I loved her deeply, but love cannot survive in an environment that constantly tears it apart. She listened, but her expression hardened. Then she got angry. Not dramatic anger, hurt anger, wounded anger. She told me I didn't understand her family dynamic, that the way things worked might seem strange to me, but it was normal for them. She insisted she didn't want to push them away. She believed that if she stayed patient, stayed helpful, they would eventually change. I tried to explain that she wasn't responsible for their behavior, but she insisted that maybe, just maybe, she needed to work harder to earn their approval. That was the moment I finally raised my voice, not out of rage but heartbreak. I told her no child should have to earn love. She paused, stared at me, and then quietly told me she needed space. Before I could respond, she asked me to leave. It was still her house, legally, and she needed time alone. So I respected her request. I packed a bag and left, thinking maybe, just maybe, distance would help her process everything. That night I checked into a hotel, and for the first time in months I slept in a quiet room. It felt wrong. It felt lonely. It felt like something enormous had shifted. But it also felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. And I didn't know then that the days ahead would pull both of us into a spiral neither of us was ready for. The following days were strange, quiet, almost surreal. Being away from her house gave me clarity I hadn't felt in years. I realized how much of myself I had given away, patience, energy, even joy, trying to protect her from a family that never intended to be supportive. I could finally breathe, play video games I'd neglected, catch up on movies, and simply exist without constant tension hanging over my head. But my heart refused to rest. I knew she was still trapped, still navigating the storm she couldn't seem to step away from. Every message she sent, every call, made me weigh my responsibility against my own well-being. Could I help her while keeping my sanity intact? I wasn't sure. The weekend came, and as expected, her family arrived again. I muted my phone, choosing to let her face them without me as a shield. It was petty, I admit, but after years of frustration, I needed her to confront reality on her own. She texted, called, pleaded, but I remained distant. She was learning painfully that she couldn't rely on me to absorb every blow. By evening, she finally reached out in desperation. I went over, not to defend her, not to placate her, but to listen. And what I found was a woman overwhelmed, but beginning to see the truth. Her parents and brother had demanded things from her, criticized her, and pushed her to the brink. She had tried her usual coping mechanisms, but for the first time, they failed. She had no shields, no distractions, and she couldn't protect herself alone. It was heartbreaking and oddly liberating. She finally recognized the impact of her family's behavior. We talked, really talked. She admitted she had let them take too much control, that she had prioritized their approval over her own well-being and over our shared life. And though she was scared, there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. We set boundaries, clear, firm, and non-negotiable. First, she would establish limits on visits and interactions. Second, we agreed couples therapy would be essential before moving forward with any wedding plans. Third, our home had to remain a sanctuary. Her family would not enter without prior agreement, and their behavior would be managed decisively if it threatened our peace. Fourth, she would take the lead on personal therapy, ensuring she had the tools to process her trauma without letting it dictate our life. Finally, we agreed on a gradual approach to no contact, starting with controlled, minimal interactions and moving toward full boundaries. For a moment, hope returned. I could see her trying. I could see her struggling, but also wanting change. I felt relief, even as the road ahead seemed long and uncertain. Then reality hit. A few days later, she accused me of being controlling, unsupportive, even manipulative. My stomach sank. But as she spoke, repeating words that sounded rehearsed, I realized she was echoing her family's narratives. Echoes of manipulation I had been trying to shield her from for years. It wasn't her. It was them. And recognizing it was painful. I stayed calm, asking for details, pointing out inconsistencies. I reminded her that we had always shared responsibilities equally: mortgage, utilities, groceries. I reminded her that love isn't control, but care and partnership. I reminded her that a healthy relationship requires mutual respect and boundaries, and that none of her family's ideals could override that. The conversation ended with exhaustion. She left to collect herself, and I stayed behind, mentally drained but resolute. I realized love alone couldn't fix this. Support alone couldn't rebuild her boundaries. She needed to choose herself, and she hadn't, at least not fully. For the next few days, I maintained distance, staying at my family's home. The quiet allowed me to reflect. I acknowledged my own growth, patience, empathy, the courage to draw boundaries. And I acknowledged that our relationship had reached a crossroads. One path led to shared healing, mutual respect, and careful rebuilding. The other led to repeated pain, resentment, and eventual separation. As the weeks passed, I focused on myself. I organized my life, invested in my career, spent time with friends and family. I discovered a sense of stability I hadn't felt in years. My fiancé's family continued their patterns, but I was no longer directly exposed. For the first time, I felt like I had agency, like my boundaries had meaning. I did hear from her intermittently, messages of regret, apologies, and at times confusion. I listened when I could, but I also recognized the hard truth. I could not save her if she refused to save herself. And for my own mental health, I needed to step back entirely. Love, after all, is not sacrificed to the point of self-erasure. Months passed. I focused on finding a home, creating a life where peace, respect, and balance were non-negotiable. I nurtured friendships, built routines, and invested in my well-being. I realized that while my fiancé's journey was hers alone, mine required courage too. The courage to let go, the courage to prioritize my future, the courage to accept that love sometimes means stepping away for the sake of both people. Eventually, I learned that my fiancé had begun to struggle further. The lack of boundaries combined with family pressure led to isolation, emotional distress, and a realization of how badly she had allowed herself to be manipulated. Friends intervened where I could not, but the process was slow and painful. It was evident that the path she had taken for years had consequences she hadn't fully anticipated. I felt sorrow, but no longer despair. My responsibility was no longer to fix her life, but to continue building mine with intention and care. And I could do that because I had learned the importance of boundaries, self-respect, and the courage to step away when necessary. Through this experience, I discovered a vital truth. Loving someone doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing both people to find their paths independently. Sometimes the strongest relationships are those that begin after we learn how to protect our own peace first. As I move forward, I carry the lessons with me: empathy without self-erasure, patience without compromise to dignity, love without surrendering one's own life. And I hold the hope that, in time, everyone, including my fiancé, can learn to value themselves as much as they deserve to be valued. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this: boundaries are not selfish. Protecting your emotional space is not cruel. Choosing your own well-being over someone else's patterns of harm is not weakness. It's courage. Love fiercely, but love wisely. Stand firm when it matters. Step back when it's necessary. And never ever let someone else's unresolved trauma consume your life. Protect your peace, honor your growth, and know that walking away can be the most profound act of love for yourself and for everyone involved.